Good evening, everyone. My name is Dwayne Quasey Wright Barrington III, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as an assistant professor of higher education administration in the Graduate School of Education and Human Development, which, of course, is part of the George Washington University here in the nation's capital. I want to give a welcome on behalf of our intern dean, Lionel Howard, our interim associate dean, Jennifer Clayton, and most importantly, all of GSEHD's faculty, staff, and students, and welcome you to the 2026 Pride Forum. This event is entitled Towards a Trans Utopia, Documenting Trans Joy to Reimagine the Present and the Future. We would not be able to do this event without our co-sponsors, the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences DEI branch, the Elliott School of International Affairs, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Multicultural Student Services Center, and of course, the newly minted Community, Culture, and Inclusion Office run by my very good friend, Dr. Jordan West. This particular event happens to be the continuation of a university seminar sponsored by the good folks in our Office of the Vice Provost for Research. If anyone is interested in seeing the prior events, I have just put a link in the chat. Joy cometh from the morning is what my mother used to say to me. She would usually add a "this too shall pass" as well when we had our hardest times. As an immigrant family growing up in Brooklyn, there were a lot of hard times, but she wanted to remind me that, that what was hard would always certainly pass. I took that to heart in my academic career, and I take it to heart in the work that we do here for DEI at GSEHD. But I also understand that sometimes waiting until the morning for joy to come is a bit superficial. I know that today's conversation is in the backdrop of a world that is, in some ways joyless, a world filled with genocide and war, a world filled with unmitigated oppression against our trans brothers and sisters. However, we still try to find that joy. Our task today is to document that joy, using Cruising Utopia as sort of a background, and to find the small places within the difficult natures and tasks that are going on. And we have an all-star panel to do that as well. But before we go there, I have the indistinguishable pleasure of introducing one of my students who is going to be the panelist here today. Manny Soferis goes by the pronouns they, she, is a PhD student in education with a concentration in education and inequality at the George Washington University's GSEHD. In the free time that they do not have, they serve as the Assistant Director of Residential Case Management within the care team here at GW. And Manny, we thank you for that work. It was crucial for all our students, including our trans students as well. They graduated with their MA in higher education with a focus in social justice. And shout out to my colleague, Denise Dorch, who helped me to do that focus. In May of 2025, Manny's work and research centers on trans epistemologies, queer and trans inclusion in higher education, and building systems of care that support marginalized students. Outside of work and research, they are passionate about creating spaces where queer community, authenticity, and connection can thrive, whether that be in higher education settings or in their work bartending in DC's lesbian nightlife. And I have observed, Maddie, in their element there. And I got to tell you, as good as they are in their research, they're good as that as well. They are especially interested in how community, care, and joy and belonging can serve as forms of resistance and transformation. Maddie, I turn it over to you to moderate this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the 2026 GSEHD Pride Forum. Like Dr. Wright said, my name is Maddie Soferis. I go by they, she pronouns. Currently in the education program within GSEHD and serve as the Assistant Director of Student Outreach and Support within the care team. But as a transmasculine, non-binary person, this conversation feels especially meaningful for me to moderate. Much of the public conversation that we're having about trans people, especially in this current administration and state of our society, focuses on crisis, legislation, exclusion, or survival. And those realities matter and they can't be ignored, but they are not the entirety of trans lives. So tonight we are going to draw inspiration from José Esteban Muñoz, Cruising Utopia, which invites us to imagine queerness not just as an identity, but as a way of envisioning and moving towards worlds that do not exist yet. At a moment when many institutions are retreating from their commitments to diversity and inclusion, and trans community continues to face significant political and social attacks, this forum is asking a little bit of a different question, which is what becomes possible when we center trans joy, trans knowledge, and trans imagination. Rather than limiting ourselves to conversations about surviving the present, we're going to explore what it means to actively create more liberatory futures and what lessons those futures can offer us today. I am super honored, super excited to be joined by three incredible scholars, educators, and activists whose work continue to challenge us to think beyond what is and towards what could be. So I will be introducing our panelists now. I'll start off with Dr. Z. Nicolazzo, is the Interim Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs in the College of Education and a professor of trans studies and education at the University of Arizona. Her scholarly work focuses on discourses of gender in educational contexts, with particular attention to how those discourses influence life chances and educational opportunity for trans students, faculty, and staff. She's the author of Trans in College, Transgender Students' Strategies for Navigating Campus Life and the Institutional Politics of Inclusion, and co-author and co-editor of several texts, including Digital Me, Trans Students Exploring Future Possible Selves Online, Becoming in Global Trans Studies, Critical Approaches to Educational Theory, Methodology, Ethics, and Politics, and Weaving and Otherwise in Relations Methodological Practice. In her spare time, she enjoys knitting, playing with a precocious dog, cooking, and baking. Thank you for being here with us today, Z. Rabbi Abby Stein is a Jewish educator and rabbi, award-winning author, speaker, and activist. She was born and raised in a Hasidic family of rabbinic descent and is a direct descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism. Abby attended yeshiva, completing a rabbinical degree in 2011. In 2012, she left the Hasidic world to explore a self-determined life. In 2015, Abby came out as a woman of trans experience. Since coming out, she has been working to raise support and awareness for trans rights and those leaving ultra-Orthodoxy. Her memoir, Becoming Eve, My Journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgender Woman, was published by Seal Press in November of 2019. Her second book, Sources of Pride, is forthcoming and will be published by Ben Yehuda Press. Thank you for joining us today, Abby. And last but not least, Dr. Darin M.L. Stewart is a professor of higher education in the Mordridge College of Education at the University of Denver. At the end of his 25-year academic career across multiple institutions, Dr. Stewart has received numerous awards and is widely acknowledged as one of the most foremost scholars in the field of higher education studies. Their research and writing has covered the philosophy and history of many illegal things in U.S. higher education and how U.S. colleges and universities engage or disengage with those things, as well as the learning and becoming of minoritized college students through intersectional lenses, including spirituality, religion, and faith. His work intentionally centered BIPOC, QT, and QTBI POC identities, knowledges, and experiences as intellectually compelling, spiritually meaningful, and morally demanding. Thank you for being here with us today. So to begin our discussion today, I'd love to invite each of you to introduce yourselves in whatever way is most meaningful for you. I think a lot of us are familiar with your professional biographies, but I'm curious about the experiences, communities, relationships, or moments that have shaped the work that you do today. And as you introduce yourself, I'd love for you to reflect on this question. So the title of this forum intentionally centers trans joy, which can sometimes feel radical in itself, especially in our current political and social climate. How do you define trans joy? And why is joy such an important site of resistance, possibility, and world making? We can start with Z, and then we can move to Abby and then Darin.
Oh gosh. Thank you for the invitation and appreciate folks spending some time with us. I'm never quite sure about people's sports persuasions, but I appreciate all the football fans taking a little break from the World Cup, and the FIFA corruption to spend some time with us today. So it's a pleasure to be here. Um, Defining trans joy, that's like a really big question. Um, I think that one of the ways I'm thinking about trans joy these days is kind of like these little like pockets of space and time that are kind of in between all of the things that pack our professional bios, right? And how we enjoy life. What's joyful for me is sinking into a good text thread with some of my friends. What feels joyful for me is losing all sense of time of day because I'm invested in a really good book. What feels joyful to me is um, sitting and connecting with friends old and new. It's a joy, especially on this panel, to be alongside Darin, who's a longtime friend and co-conspirator of mine, and also to sit with Rabbi Stein, who I just finished listening to her book a couple days ago, and it felt like we were sitting at the kitchen table having a talk, right? So I think those are some of the ways that I'm thinking about joy. It's not kind of capital J joy, but all these lowercase j joy moments that we get along the way. So, yeah, Abby, I'll kick it over to you, I guess.
Um, I think the first thing that came to mind when we were talking about trans joy is an interesting line of one of my ancestors that I grew up with. So the community I come from is known as supposedly being very focused on joy. I'm saying supposedly because nowadays it's a whole very different conversation. But historically speaking, there was a very strong emphasis. And there's a line from one of my ancestors who lived 200 years ago who said that maybe joy on its own isn't the greatest, kind of the best deed you can do in your life. But the things that it can get you to, the amazing good deeds and community building and positive life that it can get you to, nothing else in life can get you there. And to me, that is so much of when I think about, I mean, I think it's obviously joy for everyone, but specifically for trans people. And like, can I like come up anywhere and say that right now, when, as we talked earlier, there's literally people trying to genocide us in every way? I know we're talking in the context of GW, we're talking in the context of a city. I was just in DC a few weeks, not even a week ago, doing a Pride Shabbat at one of the synagogues there. Sorry, I have a bit of a something. Apologize for my coughs. And I was just thinking about the fact that here we are celebrating Pride, and a few blocks from where we were is the US Capitol, where you have half of the people there working overtime trying to really do everything they can to make our lives a living hell, pardon the language. And I think in exactly that scenario, the joy that we can bring is the most powerful thing. And I see it so often in person and online, how activism is important. I do it all the time. I just spent a whole week at New York City Hall as we started the budget proceedings, fighting for gender affirming care for trans youth, fighting for so many different things that we need. We show up at protests, we show up at rallies, we show up for each other, whether it's through mutual aid or parties and so on. These are all very important. But at the end of the day, sometimes what's really going to create and build our communities in a way that no one can touch us is trans joy. And that can look in a lot of different ways. And I don't want to come and answer this question with do X, Y, Z, and that's going to bring you joy, because that never works. Everyone has their own thing that brings you joy. Sometimes, it is just getting affirmed by logging onto a call and someone giving you a compliment. Sometimes it is by doing something bigger. But the concept of it, of us showing up in the world and being, this is who we are, you can't hurt us. Because whatever you're going to try to throw at us, I'm trans, you want to try to use some slurs? Oh, thank you. Yes, I know. I appreciate that. And so on. Our ability to show up in the world and not just be, yes, I happen to be trans and I'm a person. All of that is accurate. Yes, I'm trans and that's amazing. should we start going through the friends that I have in my life who probably would have never gotten into my life if I wasn't trans? The community, the identity, the reality that we can do this right now, the reality that we can show up in the world and be proudly who we are is the strongest statement that we can make. I think I want to wrap this up, so to speak, with one final thing that I take from our tradition. I tell people a lot that one of the things that I love most, and I'm not here to proselytize, I promise we don't do this. I'm not trying to get anyone to become Jewish. But I will say in our tradition, we have such a strong focus, which I think a lot of other traditions do as well. And I think almost every culture does it. But we have this almost a set in stone way of celebrating life cycle and year cycle events. And they always go hand in hand. I always tell people that our reaction to doing something, like our reaction to a child born, isn't just, oh, we're going to give you a name. At synagogue, our reaction is we're going to throw a party. You've turned 12 or 13, we're going to throw you a party. You're dying. I don't know if any of you have ever been at a Shiva, which is a Jewish morning. We're going to throw you a party. Everything that you do, you existing, you being a person, deserves to be celebrated and with our whole community. And I really want this, that we should bring this. Maybe I will get to talk a bit more about it later, but one of the proudest things that I've ever done was a few months after coming out, showing up at a synagogue with 500 people, and we did this massive kind of celebration. And yes, we deserve to be celebrated simply for being out and proud as trans people. And we have been doing that, and we will keep doing that, because we deserve not just to have joy, but to share that joy, and for that joy to be celebrated by everyone. Thank you.
I love all of that. Thank you so much. It is, first, it really is a marked pleasure and honor to be here in this space with both, as she said, my long time, I don't even know how many years it's been now, co-conspirator, Dr. Z. Nicolazzo, and Rabbi Abby. Thank you for being in this space. I also listened to your book here, and it was wonderful. One of the things that I delighted in was your accent, because it reminded me of home. I wasn't born and raised in Brooklyn, but I was born and raised in Harlem. And it was like, oh, I recognize that. I recognize that intonation. There's a lyrical nature, I think, to accents that are not NPR. I'll put it that way. There's a lyricism to it and a musicality that I love. And yes, you should be very proud of that accent. But for myself, as I think about other introductions, right? Really, in many ways, to say I was born and raised in Harlem in New York City is that says so much, but most people don't know how much that says, right? I was born and raised in Harlem in New York City pre-gentrification, right? And so being steeped in the home of the Black arts movement, being steeped in Black radicalism and Black cultural criticism, always being drawn, before I understood that this is what I was doing, always being drawn to the Black queerness in those spaces. And I think really, my life has been a journey. I'll use steal a term from Abby's bio. My life has been a journey of self-determination. For me, I connect that into, again, within African American cultural celebrations or about parties, but Kwanzaa, and day 2 is Kujichagulia, which basically means in Swahili self-determination. The right to define ourselves for ourselves, right? And I think in many ways that is trans joy, right? Living into manifesting the right to define ourselves for ourselves. And I've done that in my life. I've seen that in as I have deliberately constructed, I always say part of the reason why I use one of my pronouns that I am most affirmed by is, the they series pronouns is because I contain multitudes, what I always say. I contain multitudes, right? And so as and they're intersected and they're mutually constitutive. So as I think about my identity and in self-determining that in terms of race, sexuality, gender, religion, right? And so being a Jew by choice, right? I don't know if you realize you pulled three Jews together in a panel, but so I don't know that you gave enough time for this. So academics, rabbis, and three Jews, queers, we could be here like literally till tomorrow morning. But so doing that, at a point in my life, as I say in my bio, I'm at the end, I have ended a 25-year career as an academic and to self-determine what I want to do next, and to understand and to be able to live into joy, right? So I'm the trans parent of a trans child, right? And I think there's a special joy in reproducing transness, right? Being able to be part of that cycle of family and community. But yeah. And it's important because there's so much that wants us to not be joyful. And sorry, stop me if I'm getting too far ahead and leading into another question, but it's the idea of being only focused on our oppression and the struggle, and that there is a way in which dominant majoritarian society wants us to only focus on struggle, wants other people to only focus on us as objects of struggle, and subjects of struggle. And that really does not make us whole, right? It's not an I thou relationship. If I borrow something out of instead of an I it, it's I thou means you have to see people as whole people, right? And that wholeness includes by necessity our joy, right? And how we understand our joy. We understand our struggle through our joy, and we understand our joy through our struggle. It's all interconnected.
Thank you for that. And you did not steal any thunder because I want to get deeper into that question anyway. So that's perfect. That's a perfect build-up for me. So like you said, many conversations right now about trans people are framed through crisis, legislation, backlash, survival. And those realities are super important, for sure. They shouldn't be ignored, but they also have become the dominant narrative when talking about trans people. So for you guys, what do you think gets lost when trans lives are only discussed through the lens of struggle? And what aspects of trans existence do you think deserve more attention right now? In no order, y'all can just pop in.
I don't want to be the one jumping first, but if no one else will talk, I do. I will say I think we all know the struggles. Even in a place like New York, and I think it's even more so. I was chatting with a panel earlier, and I was saying specifically right now, over the past few months, and after this weekend win, a lot of people in New York were feeling very good about ourselves, and I love that. But even in a place like New York, we're still struggling a lot. We currently have to talk about the oppression. The federal government is now suing the two largest providers of gender affirming care for people under the age of 19, trying to get all that information. Yes, we're fighting it, and we're lucky to have a local and state government that is joining us in that fight, but that is still happening. And I personally have had far too many conversations. And I don't just mean like I can, even by numbers, over 2 dozen with children and their parents who are afraid, or with children or the parents that have lost their health care because a lot of even New York hospitals have stopped providing care. And we keep showing up, we keep fighting, and so on. Unfortunately, the list of things that we can struggle about is far too long. But it's, as you said, Maddie, I think the things that we maybe don't talk enough about are the beautiful parts. I think I hinted a bit to some of those earlier, like the communities that we have. We were also talking about this earlier. I don't remember who it was who was saying they're just going to like a party after this. But I think it goes way beyond just parties. It's the reality of and something that happened to me on Saturday night on the way home. We went to a watch party after the Knicks, and at 1 a.m., the entire city feels like a giant party. And I come up on this train station, and there's a lot of people screaming and chanting and dancing, and it was great and beautiful. And then, like, without even realizing, I found myself standing next to two other trans people, and we're all talking. We're not talking about trans stuff. We're talking about the Knicks. We're talking about the game. We're talking about stuff like that. But it's that moment of, I almost feel, and I know that's obviously not everyone's experience, but it's so often this feeling of we're not alone in this. We have almost a built-in community, which, yes, maybe was created out of necessity, but it's so beautiful. I know that if I need something, I just need to reach out to a few people. Not, they might not be able to help necessarily, but they will know, and they're gonna know other people, and we're gonna build. We're gonna create something beautiful. We want to do a party. There, we have so much experience. I say a lot to trans people. I sometimes talk to say about trans, but I sometimes talk to corporations. Unfortunately, but if they want to, invite people, trans people, to talk about trans issues, sure. And one of the things that I tell them about hiring trans people specifically, in addition to it, yes, it's the right thing to do, and trans people should be hired and paid for the work that we do, and so on. But it's also some of the people that know what it means to have to work for what we want. Unfortunately, no matter how accepting families might be, I know my family isn't. I'm sure some people on this call have had their own issues with their families. But even if your family is fully acceptant, we don't live in a world that is making it very easy. So we have learned to stand up for ourselves. We have learned to build something beautiful. And I wouldn't give that up for anything in the world. So let's focus on that. Let's focus on trans community, not just the community that is built out of please don't kill us, which is also very important, but the community that is built out of we want to help each other, we want to support each other, we want to dance together, we want to go to the beach together, we want to throw, I don't know, doll invasion for those of you who know Pride in New York City, and so on.
Yeah, I don't mean to be contrarian, but the first time that I read this question and started thinking about it in preparation for the panel was that there's something beautiful in the mundacity of trans life and trans existence that I think is lovely to kind of sink into. I think that oftentimes when we think about trans struggle, we like the counterpoint is to go to the other end of the pendulum, and we kind of do this either or thing. um and so I think that there's some sort of beauty in just the mundane realities that we all have in our lives. It's like those moments when your very best friend calls you up and says, "How have you been doing?" and or "What's new?" and you say, like, nothing really. And how nice is that nothing really is new, right? So I think that that's one of the things that I was thinking about, that it would be exciting to get to a place where, for many people beyond trans communities and people who love trans folks, the first thing that we think about when we think of trans existence is not either the terrible, horrible, tough things, or the kind of like singular examples of this is the first trans person to do X, Y, or Z, right? That there's just kind of a mundaneness to our lives. I think the other thing that I'm I want to kind of bring into the conversation, because I know, Abby, you've mentioned a couple of times here and there, is I I really would love to continue to celebrate, talk about, big up the way that trans communities have always been in cross-coalitional solidarity with other movements towards justice. Um, I think that there are so many different examples of how that's happening, now and historically, and I think it's really powerful and important to think about that. Um, in terms of thinking about current movements, global movements around genocide throughout the world, in terms of thinking about, there have been a couple references to New York. I have never lived in New York. My brother did. That's a different story. Um, he's not as cool as I am. Anyway, Darren has met him. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. But like in talking about New York, I think about the AIDS epidemic, particularly in the 80s and 90s. I think about gay liberation movements and how trans people, particularly trans women of color, have been on the forefront of creating change in space with communities. So that's the other thing that I'm thinking about. Abby, I'm not sure earlier. I thought I might have seen that you might be wearing a JVP shirt too, and so that's what made me think about that a little bit.
This is a new shirt that it's actually in collaboration with several different groups, including JVP, but it says Juice for Shared Safety. Not the standard there, but it's something we just launched. Yeah, thank you.
I might need one of those. Darren, do you want to add?
Um, sure. If you'll allow me to add by way of a story,
I love a
perhaps.
story.
So, um, this I've had a lot of the last times in the last like week here. Actually, even the last 5 days, had a lot of last time to do, etc. And Sunday was my last time to perform with the Denver Gay Men's Chorus. Okay. I've been a member of that chorus for 7 seasons. I was the second trans member of that chorus. And no, so and that chorus has a 44-year history. And the second, and I've been there in 7 years. The first one only started 6 months before me. So, um, and has had to, and I see our vice president is actually here in the Zoom. How you doing, Sean? Um, and but I am in previous the first, right? And so Z talks about, the limitations of talking about first, right? Um, he ended up leaving the chorus for life because life was life, right? And so my the end of my tenure on Sunday made me the longest serving or longest singing trans member of that chorus. Okay. Now, I can understand those 7 years in a couple different ways. I can understand those 7 years through the lens of it being my getting not until my fourth season when I didn't end the concert cycle. We have 3 concert cycles a year, where I didn't get to the end of a concert cycle and want to leave. That it took to the fourth season before that happened, because of a lot of trans antagonism, because that came through, pronoun misgendering, like all of those things, um, and from leadership on down, right? I could understand those 7 years through that framework. I could understand those 7 years through a more gender euphoric kind of stance in which I got to narrate on stage. I had sung solos on stage in a voice that I felt comfortable in and wasn't, and it took almost the full 7 years before I wasn't afraid to sing by myself in front of a group and be concerned about what was going to come out of my mouth. right? What that sound was going to be. We could understand those 7 years through that framework, right? And I don't think it has to be an either or, as Z was saying earlier. When we only focus on the struggle of those first 4 years, we miss the euphoria that also surrounded. Why did I keep coming back? Why did I keep coming back? And Z knows part of this story. Because she would ask me, why do you keep going back? And it was because in the midst of all of that bullshit, excuse my language, I used a worse term than hell, so I'm not the rabbi, so I get to do that. The In the midst of all of that space of rehearsal of the stage helped keep me sane throughout much of the past, 9 years that I've been in Colorado. And if I had not had that space, right, I don't know that I would literally be here right now. So it's the complexity, right? I mean, I think one of the things about being trans, as is true about being Black, as it's true about being Jewish, is that there is always a both and, always, right? And so if we only look at it through struggle, then we miss the and. We miss the both and, right? That helps us process the struggle, right? That helps us see past, see over, see under, see through that struggle. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think from what y'all are talking about, I do want to talk about trans futurity because I feel that that's been a consistent theme of like, yes, acknowledging the both and in the current day, but also where can we go from here? So one of the ideas that runs through Cruising Utopia is that future is not something that we just have to wait for. It is something that we can collectively imagine and move towards. It can feel distant, but many things that would make trans lives more joyful and safe are things that we can begin practicing right now. So I would like to end this part of the forum by asking each of you, when you imagine a more liberated future for trans people and communities, what do you see? And what feels possible that may be difficult for people to imagine today?
Darin, do you want to crack at this first? Because I know that me and the rabbi have had a first go. So.
I knew you were going to do that. And sure. Um, I was looking and it was like, yes, I have notes. Okay. But one of the things in Munoz's text that really compelled me, though, about this question, Maddie, so if I can twist it just a little bit, is the recognition when he talks about being not yet queer. We are not yet queer. I loved that framing. And particularly when he connected it to one might say that to talk about utopia, you really need, and futurity, you really need to also be talking about history and past, right? So in some ways, and as I've been thinking about this in my mind, it's like we are not yet queer, but we have been queer and we will be queer, right? And so how do we bring that past and that future together to live into a utopic present, right? Um, and so for me, it's I see, and that prefix trans, right? Going across a transdisciplinarity, a trans modality. So if we think about the arts and letters and, right? So trans modality and trans epistemologies, plural, as you are studying, Maddie, right? And so as I think about that, I pull in Z's work on trans epistemology, right? That's what, a decade ago now, Z, that article? which it's a powerful little gem. And if you don't know it, if you haven't read it, you should read it. It was in Urban Ed, right? Journal of Urban Education. So tr imagining a trans epistemology, right? I think it's at least the front part of the title. And so it's going across all of the boundaries. One of the reasons that I say that trans people, regardless of whether you have done a biophysical transition or not, whether you're on hormones or not, whether you change your pronouns or not, whatever, change your name or not, is that we cross boundaries, okay, all the time in lots of different ways. We cross boundaries simply by existing. And there is an opportunity, I think, in a trans-utopic future to practice and manifest the transitioning of and transing over, right? Transversing boundaries of thought, of form, of ways of thinking, of ways of being in the world, that we can model that for ourselves, right? And really get into what I think is somewhat sometimes lacking is intergenerational leadership building, community building, to really be able to pass on and understand both directions, right? Not just from an elder, quote unquote, elder to youth, but also the other direction, right? Within and across. So yeah, there was something else I was going to say and I forgot, but around the age thing. So like we recognize the unfortunate, despicable reality, tragic reality that for many trans folks, the life expectancy is not necessarily that long. Okay. I had another trans member in our course more recently joined who said to me a couple months ago that I was the oldest trans person she knew. I'm only 52. And yet in that, how are we practicing for ourselves intergenerational lineage and community and love? How are we loving on each other across generations? So I'll stop there.
I think I just got the hand signal to go next, so I'm happy to jump in. Yeah, thanks for getting us started, Darren. Such evocative words that you're sharing. And also, yeah, it has been about a decade since I first wrote that piece. The first draft of that piece I wrote in 2016, just in case folks are interested about how slow the publication pipeline sometimes is. Yeah, this question is such a good one. I think the first thing I think about is we need it all, right? So like thinking about the both and also reality that we need to be living in. I think that there is a place and space for all different sorts of strategies in terms of thinking about futurities and queer futurities. I am especially moved by this fantastic article that Tourmaline wrote for Vogue Online that I'm going to share with folks if people have not read this piece. But she just wrote this epic piece again for Vogue. And if you'll indulge me, I just want to read a couple paragraphs of it because I think they're so important and integral to thinking about how we can move forward together and not just think about forward, but also the right now of trans futurity. So in this piece, she writes, freedom dreaming starts with asking questions, often the same questions over and over, allowing ourselves to get deeper each time. Coming out of the long tradition of freedom schools, I focused on these three questions as an organizer. What does the dominant culture have that we want? What does the dominant culture have that we don't want? What do we have that we want to keep? These days, it's the third question that preoccupies me. The thing is, freedom dreaming isn't just about the big things, the huge world changes that we're manifesting in our movements, like police and prison abolition, free universal healthcare, and gender self-determination for all. When I give myself permission to slow down like this, and particularly when I wonder what we already have that we want to keep, what I always notice are the small things. Or I should say, what seem like the small things, but really are the big ones, the everyday acts of liberatory glamour, care, and openness that keep us alive. I notice how much I'm already surrounded by the world that I dream of. And so I think this question about futurity is also really, we need to temporally, ontologically, epistemologically, spiritually, we need to be thinking about the present moment as part of that futurity, that we're actually already building the queer liberation that we desire. And also, there's more and more and more that we can keep on doing. And I mean more not in terms of work or productivity, but in terms of volume, right? Like, give me excess joy, give me excess futurity, give me all of the things all of the time. Um, and I think that there's a maximalism that we can really be a part of that's really gorgeous and beautiful. I will also say, um, connecting maybe a little bit of Tourmaline's words with the work that Abby has written in Becoming Eve, this idea of sitting and resting with questions over and over again is a really powerful idea for me. It it has reminded me about, Abby, one of the things I kept on thinking about in listening to your book was the power of deep study. And certainly for me and Darren, deep study has been very meaningful, not only just professionally, but personally. I think the idea of asking these questions over and over and over again allows us to come into ourselves and greet ourselves multiple times a day in new and expansive ways, and in ways that help us create ourselves in and through one another that are really beautiful, right? So there's, yeah, I think there's a power to deep study, and there's a power to thinking about resting with questions and resting with selves that can help us remember that not only do we seek and desire particular futures, but we're perhaps living some of those futures right now.
I feel like I don't want to say much because you two have already shared so much, and it's like I'm reminded, given that you all mentioned we got a lot of Jews here, but in our tradition, at the end of a Passover Seder, there's this final piece of matzah you're supposed to eat called afikomen, and then you're not supposed to eat anything else, so you are left with a good taste in your mouth. So part of me doesn't want to say anything else because I want to leave everyone with a good taste of what both of you just said. Um, I think I want to I will share just briefly one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about already for the past like 10 years, and in my new book I think I write a bit more about that. It's how much I hate tolerance. My go-to line for people is to say that tolerance is for lactose or for nuts, you can be lactose tolerant, you can be lactose intolerant, that's okay. In a Jewish context, I sometimes say it's for your friends latke toppings, which we all tend to have very strong opinions about. That's what tolerance is for. I think we really need to switch the way we think about, like, to really have trans joy, we need to move past it. And we already talked a lot about that when we talk about oppression, when we talk about constantly um, fighting back against oppression and so on, and discrimination, and really focus on proactive, like, celebration. Proactive, like, our lives and our beauties are amazing. And Maddie, I love how when you started talking, you mentioned this, how we don't have to wait for the future to come, which again, and I should stop apologizing for that, but I sometimes feel like I'm being too Jewish, and which is literally in my title, so I guess I should be fine with that. But I think in Judaism specifically, there is a belief that we can't just passively wait for a better world to come. It is on us. It is on us. It is our responsibility to make that happen. Whether we talk about Tikkun Olam, which everyone knows a bit more, this idea of like we have to build a better world. I think a better for this context is a teaching in the Mishnah, the second century text that says you don't have to accomplish everything, but you can't say I'm not going to try. It is our so like, do I think that we can have a world that is truly joyous for every trans person and every trans child by tomorrow? Yes, I want to, but I don't think we're there. I don't think that's gonna happen. But that doesn't mean that we should just be like, let's just fight for our lives, which we have to do, and not focus on the long term. And I think what both of you, what Darin and Z already said, covered so much about like seeing elders to make sure that we build that like generational the wealth of generational knowledge and experience. I know you mentioned the author also of Marsha, the book about Marsha P. Johnson that recently came out last year, 2 years ago, which I've just been reading. And it is so much of like her life just being sitting in her kitchen surrounded by 10 trans people who are basically her kids and the world that that creates. And I see it with so many. I had personally, I think that trans, she wasn't even that old, but that trans person in my life was Cecilia Gentili, that I know a lot of us knew or knew about, who I got to know because she was personally my patient coordinator at the gender affirming clinic where I went 11 years ago, but was creating this world. They were like a force of this world of joy. Um, and really being, I would just say, like on a hands-on way, just being conscious about that, being conscious about creating that world and building that world. We think a lot about it. Trans people, I think, are amazing community builders. And my perhaps biggest trans elitism is the fact that it's mind-boggling to realize how good we are at that. And yes, the reason, as I said before, the reason isn't necessarily always for a good reason, but we are truly capable of building a lasting world. And we need to make sure that we provide for ourselves and for each other the tools to keep doing that, to create lasting organizations. But organizations doesn't just mean a big national nonprofit. I mean, a place where people go for a nice holiday meal, places where people go to show up when something goes well. We have more than enough places where to go when something goes bad. We need more places where I know there has been a rise in like trans proms, but that's a good example of what we need so much more to create those proactively joyous spaces. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you all for that.